faculty of art and art history, and I also have the pleasure of serving as director of museum studies, which gives me the pleasure of every other year facilitating the Curatorial Practices Seminar. And that is the exhibition that gave me the pleasure of bringing Nichola Kinch and her work here to Ursinus. The exhibition that you just viewed on the upper floor of the museum, Mother Mold, a Cosmogony, is the product of the Curatorial Practices Seminar. It was co-curated by 3 Ursinus students. It was their capstone project in museum studies. So I just want to give a shout out to Hayden James, Emelia Bowen, and Caroline Tilson. And of course, to Nichola, who has been so gracious throughout this whole process in so many different ways. I get to serve as facilitator of this program. So it is their work, and I provide guidance, but the credit should go to the 4 of them. I'm going to start by introducing one of our 3 co-curators, Caroline Tilson, and she is an Ursinus College history major who has worked as a mentor for transfer students, as president of the Pi Omega Delta fraternity, and as a member of the Berman student staff. She is the recipient of the Spring 2024 Heller's Prize in American History from the Phi Alpha Theta Society. She has worked with the Berman Museum of Art in numerous valued positions. And I want to say she completed her coursework in December, and she will be walking for her diploma in just under a month, and we are crushed by the prospect of her absence, I will add. So in her positions at the Berman, she has served as a researcher on the 2023 Interdisciplinary Visiting Artist in Residence project, which was by Adrian Colburn, called Paths of Extraction, that was out here in the gallery where Colette Fou's piece just opened, as a collections assistant in the Francois Gillot archives, and as a student co-curator on Nichola Kinch's Mother Mold, a Cosmogony. After completing her degree in fall 2024, she plans to continue learning from and working with museums and educational institutions. So please join me in welcoming Caroline Tilson.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Let me mix a little. Ooh, that's what we'll do. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. I'm so grateful to have everybody come to see Nichola Kinch's presentation on her work, Mother Mold, a Cosmogony. I'm so grateful to my co-curators and to the Berman and to Dr. Barkin and the whole staff of the Berman. I'm not going to do any more than that. I think we should just get right into Nichola Kinch's wonderful presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Nichola. Philadelphia-based artist Nichola Kinch works with various media, including sculpture, installation, painting, and video, to create poetic and fantastical objects that explore manufacturing and the art of making. Her work has been shown nationally and internationally, including exhibitions at the Delaware Center of Contemporary Art, Spaces Gallery in Cleveland, Vox Populi, Tiger Strikes Asteroid, and the Print Center in Philadelphia, the Median Arts Center in Beijing, and the Modern Arts Center in Shanghai, China. In 2015, she was the recipient of the Fleischer Win Challenge. Kinch holds a BFA in ceramics from the Myers School of Art and the MFA in sculpture from Temple University's Tyler School of Art. Kinch is currently the chair of foundations and associate professor at Tyler School of Art and Architecture in the Foundations and Visual Studies programs. Thank you, Nichola.
First, I do want to thank Deborah and Caroline and Emelia and Hayden, because it's been a really lovely experience working with them. I do spend a lot of time as an educator, but this is the first time where I've had the opportunity to have students kind of focused on my work instead of the other way around. So that was kind of a fulfilling, it was a fulfilling circle for me. So yeah, I'm an artist and an educator, and I think those two ways of being are really tied together for me. My work's always spanned a broad range of media and processes, from ceramics and sculpture to installation, photography, video, and sound even. I'm kind of a jack of a whole lot of trades and a master of very few. Making and kind of an embodied engagement with form and material is what fuels my thinking. I really like learning new processes, and it keeps me in a place of discovery, which I really believe connects me to my work and my students, and sort of situates me in the world. So before I start to kind of weave the narrative of how the Mother Mold series unfolded for me, I'm going to give you a brief overview of my practice, and I'm going to do that in a really short amount of time. So I'm compressing about 25 years worth of making into a couple moments that I think illustrate some key themes that frequently emerge and that tie into where I am at this moment. So I often show this video when I give a talk. This is my shower drain, which I was fairly obsessed with for a period of time. I really am fascinated by the way that the image is constantly changing as a result of a set of very simple factors. So the form of the water is taking its shape by the conditions to which it's being subjected. So the pull of gravity, the shape of the pipe. And on one level, it's just a really quiet meditation on a symbiotic relationship of malleable form and composition. But at the same time, the spiraling water becomes this filter or lens, which alters the picture of the drain. The image changes. So it's factual information that by its very nature creates a fiction. And that's kind of a metaphor for me for seeing in general, that there's always this kind of filter or lens that shapes an image of reality. And that's an idea that continues through a lot of the work. So whenever I show work at a school, I like to go way back. This is a piece from 2000. It was in my junior year of undergrad. It was an installation that was built into a false wall. There's a 6-foot diameter aperture with a 10-foot canvas tunnel into which a viewer could climb and crawl. And then at the end of that tunnel, there's a video projection of water passing through a porcelain funnel and then reversing and coming back out. So again, this is from the 2000s, so pardon the video quality. So, you'll see water a lot in my work. So here again, I was really interested in the way that the form of the water was dictated by the shape of the funnel. And I wanted to create a situation in which the viewer's interaction with the piece would mimic that experience. I was engaged with the idea of a body or a person being shaped by their surroundings or a particular path they were taking, and thinking about mind and body connection and the way movement can activate or calm the mind, and also physicality as a way of knowing or understanding. And I was also thinking a lot about alternate means of viewing that differ from the sort of traditional Western notion of a passive imprint of light, and was thinking about it more akin to the Japanese verb maru, to see, which is, it's not a receptive process, it's an active one, like a doctor examining a patient, right? So it's an exploratory as opposed to a receptive. Okay, so this is just the interior to get a sense of scale. Tiny me. Okay, so I'm hopping ahead to 2004. This is my thesis work from MFA, and it also represents a kind of key point in my thinking, which I was really focused on point of view, like in a literary sense. So the structure of storytelling, One of my most profound literary experiences was when I read Nabokov's Lolita. And when I was inside of that story, I was really cognizant of the way that my picture of the main character, Dolores or Lolita, was so shaped by this unreliable narrator. HH, right? And I could only know her through him, through his lens. And although I was totally cognizant of that fact and that it was a distorted view, I would still find myself slipping into that story. And there was a cognitive dissonance, but it was also a very powerful experience. And I was thinking about also literary devices and how strangely pliable a shape of reality can be, right? How you can manipulate it by a lens or a point of view. So again, malleable images, shifting points of view. This one was sort of built like a series of photographs from different angles. So I thought of it as like flat images that would unfold as you moved around the space. And again, thinking about positioning a viewer and immersive seeing. Whoops, wait, there was one more point that I lost. Oh yeah, that landscape starts to kind of crystallize as a symbol for me of sometimes fantasy, sometimes just an alternate reality that might exist at the same time. So that was unfolding here for me with this. All right, now I'm really jumping forward to 2015. And this was a piece that was one of a pretty long series of optical machines that I started producing. I was looking at machines that produce images. And if I were doing a really comprehensive lecture right now, I'd get super nerdy about the history of a number of different elements in this machine. There is a video clip I'll show next that outlines a few, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'll say I was focused on emphasizing the mechanism of the image production as a mediating force. So this giant machine is in between two people. And this particular image producing machine is an electrotachyoscope. But with this one, it's made for two people, right? And they have to communicate because the pacing of the turning of the crank dictates whether or not the image reads. So the person looking through the viewer has to guide the person cranking the machine. And it's a very Sisyphusian task. It fails more than it succeeds. And that is a metaphor. So it's a electrotachyoscope, which was a machine that was invented prior to the zoetope, or right around the same time. And after building one, I can tell why it sort of sank in popularity. But this one animates lithophanes. Lithophanes were usually made out of porcelain, and porcelain can get translucent in areas where it's thin. So an image is carved in relief. The thick areas become the darks of the image, and the thin areas become the light. So the strobing, when you're just looking at it, it looks like white slides, but when the strobe light hits it and illuminates it, an image emerges. So that'll come up in a minute and you'll see. But it is that drain, the drain I was obsessed with. So it is animating water going down a drain. So here's a split screen of a lithophane that's half illuminated, half not. Those were carved on a CNC. They're not porcelain, they're corian, which is a countertop material. And of course, none of this you can pick up with a camera at all, ever. So that's another part of it. But it's the same animation that I showed you in the beginning, but in lithophanes. So machines that produce images, another thing that I'm thinking about. I also think a lot about politics and the rhetoric surrounding it as an image shaping machine. So this is work from, I think this was November 2016, so right before the primaries. And I think, like I said, our political systems and the language that we use to describe them shape our vision of what's possible. And so, where we place value is both determined and reflected by these systems, and even in areas that are supposed to or try to present an opposition often fail because the system feels familiar. So this is just one piece from a larger installation that sort of dealt with those ideas. And that was a zoetrope animating objects as a donkey turning into an elephant, symbols for the two-party system. Okay, so now I'm jumping forward to more. Hang on, here we go. So that was 2016 or whatever, and we all know that a whole lot of things happened after that. And I was frustrated and unhappy with the state of our country. But I also felt powerless and at a loss about what to do. And for me, making is a way of thinking. It's how I wrap my head around things I can't comprehend. So I was aware of that I'd inherited a system that didn't fit me politically. Also, I was aware that I was complicit. I knew that I engaged in ways that were convenient for me. And I knew there were ways I was engaging that I couldn't see or understand yet. So I was kind of grappling with those ideas. And from May to November of 2019, I thought by the way, I thought I'd whip that out in a month. I'm just telling you. That's what I thought I would do. And that didn't happen. So I built a scale model of the White House out of porcelain. And this giant white mansion has historically housed the men holding seats of power. It's a really potent example of a symbol of the values of this country from my perspective: wealth, whiteness, patriarchy. And I started to imagine what a society would look like that housed their leaders maybe in like a communal living space or a high-rise apartment building. What's that culture? Not one that houses it in a museum. So I built this, here, let me go back to so I built this scale model of the White House, and with no intention of firing it, because in ceramics, if you don't like a form that you've made, you can just put it in water and it slakes down and you reconstitute the material and you can build something else out of it. It's called reclaiming. And so I reclaimed it. And I really liked the idea of reconstituting something that took so much time and energy and had been devoted to creating in order to make space to think about new possibilities. I saw it as an invitation to myself and maybe others to propose a new paradigm, a new way of being that wasn't rooted in capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and all the other hierarchies that come with those structures. And I thought maybe I would use that clay to make something else afterwards. I didn't really know. I just knew I was going to make it and melt it. And it was like in a room, it couldn't come out. So, so I did that. And what happened after it fell and submerged was this landscape kind of emerged after I drained the water. And I loved it. I loved the landscape, and I didn't want to, I wanted to preserve it, which was never my plan, but that is what I decided to do. So as it drained, you could see remnants of the building, but it also sort of looked like a landscape that progressively got drier and more parched and sort of turned into a desert. So this will zoom out in a minute. And so that's it in its dried state. And so then I decided that I was going to fire it. But today I'm really good at coming up with things that make like an insane amount of work for myself. Somehow I like that. So in order to fire it, I had to train. I wanted it stay in its configuration, I had to transfer it from the basin to a table and map it. And then I had to get it into these kiln shelf sized forms that I could move into a kiln. And then I wanted them to come back together. So this was a process in and of itself. I had to invent different ways of getting things underneath it. And I did. I got it. I got them off the table into the kiln. I'm going to just fast forward this a little bit. You can see that there was like these spatulas made, and then we had to cut the paper off. Fast forward, fast forward, fast forward. There was about, I don't know, 40 of these sections. Fired them all. And then I had to get them off the shelf. Right? So, and I knew I was going to need to get to the underside of them to sort of fix them into these segments. So I started building these box frames. Enough section that we can have some give here, so that when we go in with the plaster bandages, we can find it. Then I'm going to frame up. I was training an assistant to help me because I wasn't thinking this was a piece. These were just to a means to an end. Okay, so you get that on. Let me fast forward a little. I promise this is going somewhere. Okay, so then after I did that, they got covered in plaster bandages. Remember, there's like 40 of these. So this was sort of to make this like cradle so that I could flip it over and also transport it, but hold them in their configuration. So after the plaster bandages, then there's a coat of regular plaster. I'll fast forward this, but I think the amount of times I had to touch it is important, which is why I'm showing you. Okay, so 40, right? There you have it. I'm nuts. I got them out home to my studio. I flipped it over, and then I kind of fell in love with that shape. But they were really crappy and not, they were just Luan stapled together. So they sort of sat around in my studio for a while and eventually ended up getting coated with cedar and routed, and they are what makes the cradlescape that's upstairs. So they were like these snowy, pillowy landscapes to me that were for protecting and caring for something. So that kind of got me thinking. And they were also a mold. It was a mold, and I teach mold making. So then I was thinking about mold making, and in mold making, when you make a flexible silicone mold for a large form, you need to make a support structure that's called a mother mold. So it's this rigid structure that holds the form so that it can reproduce and you can work with it. And I really liked this idea of this structure, and I was like, what if that reverberated? So I just started playing really gesturally with those materials, silicone and plaster, and having those layers build out. And I was thinking about it as like, what if this was a new metaphor for thinking about a societal structure, right? That was based on reverberating layers of support instead of consumption or hierarchies. And that I was just sort of wombing these rocks with this form and playing with it, playing with the negative space or not, and trying to be kind of just gestural and let the materials go. These are the colors that the materials come out of the box. And then they really started looking like geological layers to me. And I kept playing with it, and tried out maybe I thought about what if there were some kind of cultural artifact that was celebrating this this society. So these are rocks, again, wombed with silicone and plaster, but I also started playing with pigments. This piece is called Cosmic Birther. And then I went to the Natural History Museum, or no, the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. And they had this, I mean, this is not uncommon for anthropology museums, but I loved the way the landscape was sort of articulating elements of the culture, and it was sort of above and below ground. And I got a little obsessed with that and started thinking again about like this space of an anthropology museum and maybe relics or things that were maybe landscapes and kind of continuing to womb these rocks, but also started playing with prints that might reflect that kind of layering and geological space, and playing with them in relation to objects. So these are kind of the mother mold sculptures that existed. I mean, this was maybe like a year, these unfolded over a year. And then I also started casting these molds in wax and playing with layers of pigmented wax there. And this image, this rock, you'll see it upstairs a few times. This started to be the like symbol of the mother mold, right? That was like if you if you had the mythology of the birth of this universe, maybe this was the thing that was floating in space. And then I started wanting to play with making a form and a mold that were the same form and materials that could sort of reproduce themselves. So I was making candles and burning them into water and molds, and playing with pigments and looking at the way that would create gradations, and the shape of the vessel would sort of change the shape that the wax took. And then I got really, obsessed with just watching these things make themselves in water. And I wanted to find a way to bring my experience with these materials into the crystallized form of the show. Shows always feel like funerals to me because they lose this magic. So a lot of what's upstairs is me kind of trying to pull that in. So this is, the wax. This is like the view from above and then the view underwater. So as the wax drips in, it's like a 3D printer, basically. I invented 3D printing right here. Yeah, so also at that time, and then, these artifacts that are on display upstairs were made through that process. But I also started reading the work of comparative religion scholar Marseille Iliad at this time, and he talks a lot about the way origin stories in religion mythologies shape the world views of various cultures. And he talked a lot about the role of ritual for religious human beings. And he described ritual as like a conduit to ontological time. Like it would take you back to the moment when the universe you're existing in happened, right? So for Christianity, it's like when Adam and Eve happened. Like ritual can take you back to that moment, and you can connect with that first moment of the narrative that shapes your paradigm. And then I was like, because I'm a little bit of like a sci-fi geek, I showed the curators, all my sci-fi interests, but I was like, oh, well then ritual's a time machine. And if ritual's a time machine, then you can go back, and that's when you can change the story, right? Instead of repeating a narrative that's your moment, right? So I wanted to build a time machine. That's what this is. It's also kind of like it's like a ritual space. It's a time machine. So the objects on that sculpture upstairs are they're made of wax and they're candles. They're meant to burn into that basin, and become the kind of primordial goop that forms the next. It's also a mold, right? The basin is a mold. It cradles that material and shapes that material. So that gets me up to this moment of the exhibition. And I think you've all seen it, but I'll flip through just a couple of images. I kind of saw the whole exhibition as somewhere between a ritual space and a natural history museum or an anthropological museum that has these artifacts and pieces of mystery for the beginning of this narrative. Yeah. That's so I think we could move into the conversation now if that works well. Thank you. Are we pulling the chairs over? All right, that sounds good.
Hi. Hi. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's always interesting to kind of look back. Very early on in our work with Nichola, the three of us did a sort of research into all of this stuff, and getting to see all of it again was kind of like a fun little blast of the past to kind of go through sort of the history of Nichola and the history of a sort of ahistorical moment, because a cosmogony is creating at the very, very beginning, a sort of place without time, sort of outside of it in a lot of ways. So that's awesome. We were so fortunate to work with Nichola on all of this stuff. I kind of want to talk a little bit more about, you brought him up, Iliad, because he was so important as we were working through talking about the exhibit and how we were going to talk about it and how we were going to work through titles and writing and all those things, and about that sort of religious sort of piece, especially with your idea of sort of working outside of a hierarchy, because so much religion is related to hierarchy. And I feel that Mother Mold really tries to avoid all of that in a lot of ways. It tries to work kind of outside of that. Did you find when you were working through it that, I know we talked about it a lot, how religion sort of did and didn't fit?
Yeah, so I'm not religious. Because I don't believe in organized religion. I don't believe in a structure that is dogmatic and presents well, I should be more specific. I don't subscribe to monotheism, right? Which is it's based on a hierarchy, right? There is a oneness there, and I don't think of the world in terms of a oneness. I think of the world in terms of a multiple different views, right? So he's a religious scholar, right? Because I am interested in the study of the way that religion and those narratives shape culture and society. But yeah, so and also for me, making is a ritual. Like, my experience with making is that it takes me out of the time of my normal day to day, right? I activate something else. And I think for some people who engage in religion, things like prayer and meditation do that as well, right? It sort of shifts them into a space that's connecting to something outside of themselves, larger than themselves. So
Absolutely, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then another part of our sort of talking was about sort of titles and things, and we talked about Latin a lot, which has a religious connotation, but I think the titles you chose, like Ordiri and Tempus Machina, also sort of kind of undermined it in a lot of ways, because we were working not with the religious aspect that a lot of people associate with Latin as a sort of like ethereal invoking of a god, but instead of this idea of invoking source, because Latin is the source language in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's like it's a root language. Yeah, so that was my interest in Latin. And also Iliad was referring to a lot of Latin, so a lot of those, not Tempus Machina, which is time machine, but a lot of the other ones sort of come from the ideas that he was unfolding in there. But yeah, I think my connection to it was as like a kind of a root language. But they also, most of the titles I choose sort of have slippery meanings. They can mean different things. And I like that too, right? So.
Yeah, we said many times metaphor is your favorite way of talking. And it's very, very true. That metaphor kind of fits with every single piece and every single title. That someone could walk in and take one in a million different sort of interpretations.
I'm having a crisis with metaphor. I mean, it is my main medium, and I think it's really important because it does help us to see something we can't see, right? It's a lens too. It's a machine for imaging. And also my crisis is it's not enough. Like metaphor is not enough. And I feel like I operate in it. So I'm kind of grappling with that a little bit, right? It's still important though. I think the narratives, the stories we tell really do impact what we can see, you know? They're a scrim and a lens. So anyway, I can go on about metaphor. I'm having problems with it right now.
I gotcha.
It's also my best friend. So.
Yeah. Like many things. I really, really loved working on the installation process with you in January. That was a real highlight because when we got to the space, it made it all a lot more real just because we got to see the work very, very early on. And I think it was like late August, early September, as it was not only like going through the sort of process of making, but like titling and all of those things. And then when we got to it in January, it had changed in a lot of ways, but it had also kind of like solidified in a lot of ways. And it was such a fun process to sort of create it in the space. And I think that we even talked about this before, but I always thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about how just like putting it in the space was sort of creating another sort of mold out of the place. Putting the shelf up was sort of trying to match the curve of the wall, which was very peculiar. Created a sort of different sort of shape of
that.
Yeah, the shape of the wall kind of changed everything about how we wanted to use the space. And I really enjoyed that process with you.
Thank you for that observation. And also I enjoyed it with you and Emelia and Hayden too, the whole process, because as I mentioned in the beginning, it's not often that, you know, as a teacher, what I often do is walk into someone else's world and try to understand their world and support their world. And as teachers, we don't usually get that experience, but that's what happened with you all. You stepped into my world. Wait, I want to show the thing I showed you guys first. Hang on. They stepped into my world and I showed them this. And I was like, okay, so it goes like this, guys. It's like, they were just looking at me, you know, but they followed with
that
me.
Was huge. Trial thought was huge to our process.
And so on that topic too, I remember Deborah talking with you all and me about curation as a form of caring. And I felt that in this process, right? It was like, it was full. The experience of having someone be willing to step in your world and sort of look through and at the world through the way you're thinking about it is a unique form of intimacy that rarely happens. So I'm glad you enjoyed it too.
Yeah, it was an absolute blast. Kind of going back to the sort of geologic of it, that's been a sort of a through line for a lot of the process, going all the way back to the White House up until the specimens. I'd love to talk a little bit about the sort of decision to magnify and how that sort of reflects our sort of understanding of a science museum and the geologic.
Yeah, so I mean, the decision to magnify was really because, you know, in that in the vessel upstairs where I'm melting them, the water becomes a lens that does magnify it, right? So when you're looking in that mirror at that object, it's really blown up. And so that was the experience I was having with them as they were forming. And I wanted to sort of bring some of that to the space. So that was it. It also, I also like this, just formally, the circles in relation to some of the drawings where I was kind of, those were like a morning ritual that the curators selected some key ones. During that time, I was just making these drawings every morning while I was reading. So it was also a tie back to that kind of imagery. Is that where you're going with that, or is it okay?
Yeah, and those dioramas were really, I think we kind of described them as dioramas, as sort of almost like a quasi textbook sort of image of how a world is made or how the world is created, as sort of the mother mold.
Yeah,
universe.
like diagrams.
Like a diagram.
Yeah, of maybe of that time moving and
Yeah, that was a really fun set of days where Emelia and Hayden and I were sort of playing around. We had them all laying out and deciding what narrative made the most sense, because we deciding on which wall each image would go, which ones fit the closest together. Were they in conversation? Some of them were very deeply in conversation, like the two diptychs of the law of correspondence, which are, they're never separated, they're never far apart, versus the small uncolored pencil drawings where they could tell a different conversation depending on just the slightest movement.
I love that you remember all the titles, because when you say them, I have to be like, which one is that again? Thank you.
Yeah.
You're a good art historian.
Thank you. When we got our titles, we made each of the labels ourselves. We spent a lot of time kind of deciding on placement of titles, where the titles were going to go, near or closer to the artworks, and all of those things. So we got up close and personal with them. I'll never ever forget them, I don't think. Never ever.
Never say never. Yeah.
Well, another thing that I think would be really valuable to talk about is your centerpiece, the kind of the last piece that came in, the spaceship, our spaceship. The center is where you are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the center is where you are. Oh, yeah, that's a fun one to talk about. I think I have an image to support this discussion. That's a crack in the sidewalk. That I was so I was on sabbatical when I was doing all this reading and drawing every morning, because you can't really do that when you're not on sabbatical. And I was also, going to yoga every day, and I would walk there, and there was just this amazing crack in the sidewalk, like right in front of a church. And Iliad was talking about axis mundi, which is like the center of the earth. And often, religious man will have, like, a temple is often the axis mundi, right? And so, but in other cultures, it could be a stick that you carry around, and right, you place it, and that is the center of the universe. Forget exactly where the center is where you are came from, but that was a quote. And I really liked that idea that you carry around the center of the universe inside of yourself. And so I was thinking about those things, and also, because I am a nerd, I was like, well, this is a portal to somewhere. And I just wanted to cast it. So one day I just took a bunch of silicone out in the yard, and this thing is, it doesn't look that big here, but it's as tall as me. So it was a process. And then I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but it was in my studio functioning like a shock absorbing rug for a while, because it's like that, right? Which is another mechanism of support, right? I'm old, my back would hurt from standing on the concrete, so I'd stand on this. And then I just kind of loved this piece. Yeah. So I don't have much more to say about it now. It was an impulse that felt right. Is there more you want to hear about?
Yeah, I'd like to also talk about a little bit the decision to create the sort of support, the steel and then the mirrored base. Mirror functions a lot within the mother mold of cosmogony. There's a lot of reflection to be done. And then steel is often sort of material of choice for the altar, for the mother mold stand, all of those places as well.
Yeah. I want to say one other thing before I talk about that. The other thing about this is that the composition looked like those landscapes that are kind of mirroring one another to me. They're the same. It's the same sort of composition. So when you brought up reflecting, I remembered that. The decision with that was that this piece I really loved on my concrete floor. It made a lot of sense on my concrete floor because that's where you would have a support rug. And I knew that it would not look like that on the carpet, that it wouldn't function that way. And I also kind of like the idea that it might hover. We all talked about that. So the mirror and the steel, I mean, that was really the last decision that happened. I almost didn't put the piece in. And at the end of the day, those were aesthetic decisions, which is not usually how I make the choices, but for that one it was. It's really a pedestal that kind of connected it to the stands that exist in the altar piece, and also a circle is a year is a circle around an idea of the world. So it was sort of reflecting that kind of universe. It was a way to ground it in the universe, really. Yeah.
And then with steel more generally, with the years of circle and the altar, we were talking a lot early on about how that process went down. Do you want to speak a little about how you made those incredible, like the steel stand?
Oh, I did not fabricate the steel stands. I designed them, and then they were cut with a plasma cutter from my drawings. By a welder. I have welded like the big machine, the big, I welded that one, but I don't weld anymore because I'm tired.
Very fair.
Because I'm busy hauling rocks. Yeah.
And making the candles.
So yeah, those were plasma cut. Is that the question?
Yeah.
And it was like me drawing big things and giving people a piece of paper. And they were very kind. And
yeah. And both also continue with that idea of reflection, because you created both of them are a stand where you've got a base on each side that are mirrors of each other. There's the diptych, which is law of correspondence. The use of mirror is pretty constant around the whole exhibit. You want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so I love, you make such good observations. For me, it's not about like a binary, this versus that. It's about this and that, right? That two things or multiple things could exist at once. So the reflection, the mirroring, in multiple like in multiple axes is about that. The acknowledgement of sort of multiple truths or realities.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That was a big part of our sort of discussions as curators, was sort of that multiple truth idea of like every lens being different for every person. The way a reflection can be kind of manipulated or changed based on the person looking at it. When we were putting in the altar, we turned it so many different ways to figure out what angle created the best sort of idea of reflection and the idea of kind of meeting the altar.
That took all four of us.
Yeah. We rotated just a little bit at a time to be like, is this where we want to land it? Or is this a different sort of time machine? And we changed it basically throughout the whole weeks. And it really took on so many different forms as we added the light, as we added the candles. It like became sort of every layer of support created a different sort of image. So it was really, really fun to sort of put all that together.
I like that.
Yeah. How are we on time? Are we ready for questions? So does anybody have any questions that we want to? I gotcha.
Please.
Have a good night. No, fair enough. Fair enough. Have a good night. Yes.
Moment of realization. I'm a classical musician, and I realized for years when I listened to a symphony, where and when it was recorded, the orchestra, the conductor, the time of day, each time you hear it, it's a different thing. Well, Nicole was talking about the one, I don't remember the title of it, but she said, depending on the light, the atmosphere, and the point of view, this is a different piece of art every time you look at it. And I realized that that's just another facet of multiple personalities existing at the same time.
I think I said realities, but sure, personalities, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, early on, we talked a lot about music and how we wanted music to play. We had a running playlist, the whole curator, we called it a sort of a curator camp when we were all working together to assemble everything. We had a growing playlist of sort of music that kind of spoke to us in the works. And also just this idea of like very early on, just listening to, how perspective changed with John Cage's 434, which is a famous piece of where you hit play and there's silence and you just have to take in the world around you. So music is a really great connection. I think you made a great observation there because it's one of those things that's so ubiquitously subjective. Like every single person will take a different place from it, and every single iteration is so different. Awesome.
Music is a time machine too, right? Like it can transport you to another time, right? Like.
I think it's public on Spotify, right, Emelia? Oh boy.
Yeah. Any other questions that aren't my family? Here, I think they maybe can't hear you.
All right. So my question has to do with the molds that were created from the White House and sort of that process. And I thought it was, it almost feels like, for me at least, I'm curious that, like, if there's still work that could be done with it, because I feel like it was probably a cathartic experience, following the 2016 election to sort of go through that process. Yet it hasn't gotten better. And I feel like, is there more that can be done, or when you finish that piece, do you feel that there's nothing more, you don't want to touch it because it's already done, or can it be built upon more to sort of provide a catharsis with current politics?
You're talking about the remnants of the
Yes.
White House, yeah. So I have two answers to that question. First of all, the pieces that were finished, they were sold. I sold them off for pay as you wish, and then donated the money to like grassroots organizations, not government funded, things that I felt a connection to. So I did that, and is there more that can be done? God, I hope so. I mean, I think that's what I'm trying to do. That's why I'm saying I'm grappling with metaphor. Like I'm trying to change how I think about it so that I can think about what else can be done, right? Like, I mean, that's sort of the conundrum. We're in this spot and it's our whole world. Every way we think about the world is shaped through those lenses. So and I think metaphor is incomplete, but I think it's like the way to start for me anyway, right? Like it's about opening how we can think. Does that make sense to you? So yes, and I don't have the answer. Do you? I want you to. Like, I'm trying to get there. I think and for me that means changing how my mind functions. So I'm engaging in that. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's a great question.
All right. If there's no other questions, that concludes the artist conversation. Thank you so much, Nichola, for coming out to talk to us.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to visit.
And to get out of here.